Today we're going to discuss congruence, and we're going to start with the basics of congruence first. So congruent means that items are the same in both size and shape. So they're exactly the same size and they are exactly the same shape. And non-congruent items are ones that are not the same or ones that are not congruent. So let's look at these shapes that we have here, and we're going to color the polygon that is congruent to the given one. So if we look at the first one is that rectangle, and the congruent shape is this far one, and it's actually the exact same shape. All I did was copy and paste it and turn it, but it looks like it's a little bit skinnier in the shape, in the colored shape, but it's actually not. It's exactly the same. Your eyes are just playing a trick on you. The next shape is still a quadrilateral, and the one that it is congruent to is this one. It matches the shape and the size. This three-sided quadrilateral or three-sided polygon or a triangle matches this one. They're congruent. And then the last one, this one is congruent here. Alright, so now let's talk about some congruent statements, and we're going to get a little bit more fancy with our congruence. So if two polygons are congruent, their corresponding sides are congruent and their corresponding angles are congruent, and corresponding means that they are matching. So if you wanted to replace the word corresponding with the word matching, you could. So they have matching sides and they have matching angles. Label the congruent corresponding sides and the angles. So if we look at this shape, this is triangle, and I'm just going to go alphabetically. Triangle A, B, C. And I put a little triangle there. That's how you know it's a triangle A, B, C and not a line segment. And then this is triangle D, E, and F. So let's label the corresponding sides. And I'm going to use the triangles that we had written out up here to kind of help us. So the first thing that we're going to look at is, let's start with side AB. Side AB, which is right here, and it's a line segment. Line segment AB is going to be congruent to line segment DE. They are in the same spot. They're in the same location. So DE is congruent to AB. And then line segment AC is going to be congruent to line segment DF, which is right there. And then the last one that we have is BC. So line segment BC is congruent to line segment EF. Now, an interesting thing is that you can also use the letters that I wrote out at the top to help you with this. So you can look, AB and DE are congruent. AC and DF are congruent. And then BC and EF are congruent. So you don't necessarily have to use the pictures if you don't want to. You can use what they're giving you in the description. So let's use that to help us figure out our corresponding angles. So corresponding angles are angles that are in the same place, and they have to be in the same order, so order matters for both of these. So angle A is going to be congruent to angle D. They're in the same location. And you can see I'm drawing a little angle. If you want to put the little angle swoop in there too, you can. So angle A is congruent to angle D. And angle B is going to be congruent to angle E. and angle C is congruent to angle F. Now I'm going to erase my picture a little bit just to kind of give you a better geometrical representation. So this is A, B, and C, and this is D, E, and F. So the way we can say that line segment AB is congruent is we can put little tick marks. So AB is congruent to DE. And AC, so I'm going to put 2, is congruent to DE, which gets 2. And then BC, which gets 3, is going to be congruent to EF, which gets 3. Now, if you were paying attention when I did the angles, angle A, they get little arcs, is congruent to D. And B is congruent to E. And C is congruent to F. So you can see my little geometric markings. I can match my congruent size, I can match my congruent angles, just by looking at the marks. So let's look a little bit more into that. A congruent statement, in a congruent statement, the vertices identifying each polygon are written so that the congruent vertices appear in the same order. So that was just like what I talked about on the other side. For example, the diagram below, we have CBD and PQR. So you can see that C and P are have the same measurement, and they also have a singular arc. You can see here, there's C and there's P. You can also see that angle B and angle Q are going to be the same. They both have double arcs. D and R are both the same because they have double marks. And then you can match the sides too. BC or CB and PQ both have 3 tick marks, and you can match them from there. So 2 polygons are congruent if all pairs of corresponding angles are all congruent and all pairs of corresponding sides are congruent. So let's look at the example. It says determine whether the triangles shown are congruent. If so, name the corresponding parts and write a congruent statement. So if we look at this, I'm just going to look at the arcs, and then we can look at the sides too. So if we let's start with our smallest side, which is the 4 centimeters. So we have XZ line segment is congruent to, and I went single arc to triple arc. I went this way, so I'm going to go single arc to triple arc, which means I have to go from M to L. Order matters for this. And then I'm going to do the next corresponding side. Let's do the 6 centimeter one. So I'm going to go XY. So I went single arc to double arc. So I'm going to do this one, single arc to double arc. So I have to do M to N line segment is congruent. And then the last one, I have Y to Z. So I went double arc to triple arc. I have to go double arc to triple arc for this one. N to L are congruent. And then if we look at the corresponding angles, well, I'm just going to look at the arcs. X is a single arc, so angle X is congruent to the next single arc, which is angle M. The double arcs, angle Y is congruent to angle N. And then the last one, angle Z, is congruent to angle N, or angle L, I'm sorry. So our congruent statement, I'm going to use the arcs to help me. I'm going to go in order. So triangle, because that's a triangle, X, Y, and Z, I went single arc, double arc, triple arc, is congruent to triangle M, N, L, single arc, double arc, triple arc. And if you don't like doing the corresponding sides and the corresponding angles by matching them up, just look at the congruent statement. XY and MN. Didn't we have that right here? If they're in the same location, Z and L angles, they were right here. As long as they're in the same location and you can match them up, you can figure out which ones are corresponding. So go ahead, I want you to try determine whether the polygons shown are congruent, and if so, name the corresponding parts and write a congruent statement. So make sure you do the sides and the angles, and then you can do a final congruent statement. So these ones are yes, they are congruent. And the congruent statement would be triangle PQR is congruent to triangle CBD, or some other variation of that, but make sure that you matched your order. And you can see that line segment PQ is congruent to line segment BC. Line segment PR is congruent to line segment DC. Line segment RQ is congruent to line segment BD. And I'm putting a line on top of these because they're line segments. And then we have the angles. Angle P is congruent to angle C. Angle R is congruent to angle D. Angle Q is congruent to angle B. And then for number 2, is are those congruent or are they not congruent? So these ones turn out to be not congruent, because this side is 7 and this side is 8, and those cannot be congruent. Okay. So last page, we have one more example, and then you guys are going to try the rest of these. So it says in the figure, triangle AFH is congruent to triangle QRN. Find the measure of angle Q. So we're looking for this measurement here. Now if we look at the congruent statement, here's Q. What angle would correspond with angle Q? It has to be in the same location in the congruent statement. What would match with angle A, which is right here? So what is the measure of angle Q? Well, angle Q has to be 40 degrees because it matches where A is. Using the picture above, find the measure of RN. Well, if I look at the congruent statement, RN is here in the back. If I look, so then I can match it to the corresponding one. It's going to be FH. Here's FH. So that must mean it is 9 inches. All right, you go ahead and try the next part. I want you to find the measure of angle X, the measure of line segment YX, and the measure of angle W. So the measure of angle X matches up with the measure of angle B, and angle B is 145 degrees. YX, which is here, matches up with, and I have to read it backwards, CD, which is here. Oh, CB, I'm sorry, I did that wrong. No wonder I can't find it. CB, not CD. And that is 4 meters. And then angle W is that first one, so it's going to match up with A, and that's going to be 70 degrees. Okay, so once you know where you're looking for, it's actually not too complicated. All right, and then the last little part, I want you to do 6 and 7. Tell me if they're congruent or non-congruent, and if they are congruent, you're writing a congruent statement. So this is a congruent statement, something like that. And then you're finding the measurements for 8 through 11 for those ones that they want. So go ahead, pause here, and I want you to do the congruent statement if they're congruent for 6 and 7, and then answer 8 through 11. And here are your answers to 6, 7, and then 8 through 11. Please let your teacher know if you have any questions.